So this is the size of the massive secrecy complex that we have that's being paid for with our tax dollars. You got the CIA, my former home, that has grown into a huge organization from what it used to be. You've got the National Security Agency. You've got the National Geospatial Agency and an overhead picture of the National Reconnaissance Office. Massive, massive organizations. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans inside the United States bound by secrecy oaths. Okay? So basically, it's established a global digital surveillance order. And most of our allies are a little upset at this. We're not just spying on us, we're spying on everyone. The NSA has got connections, global connections all over the world. So we've got a global digital surveillance network. I want you to look at this because this slide is, at least in my humble view, is upsetting. I went in and I did some research to find out what the cost, the actual cost in tax dollars of the shadow government and the deep state. How much of our tax money are they spending on these things? Well, let's look at it. $50 billion annually is the total intelligence budget, tax revenue. $598 billion is the total defense budget. $150 billion is the cost of overseas military bases, many of which are no longer needed. $5.9 billion military aid to foreign countries like Pakistan. As I mentioned earlier, people who hate us, we give them millions a year out of the shadow government funds. $4 billion, I mentioned this earlier, is about what's spent from congressional on lobbying Congress on behalf of Lidos Holdings and others. About $4 billion annually is spent just on lobbying Congress alone. Now let's look at us. Let's look at that's $803 billion in tax revenue that's spent. I understand from other sources it's more like $1 trillion is spent a year on the deep state and shadow government complexes. About $1 trillion a year is probably a better figure. I just broke this down specifically from what I could dig out, but it's about $1 trillion is what they're spending of our tax dollars. Anybody vote for that? I know I didn't. Anybody know about that? Yeah. Now look at this. What's the cost to Americans' vital security? Does not the Constitution say that government's function is to protect the safety and security of Americans and serve the people? Isn't that the whole idea? Well, this is what's happening to Americans. Social Security has been stolen. They've taken all the money out of Social Security and spent it on this stuff. It's now in the red. And this is not they try to call it an entitlement program. I don't know about you all, but I put hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month into Social Security so it would be a retirement someday. And they took it completely and they spent it on this. How about this? Medicare. I mean, people are suffering. People are, another entitlement program. We've got to cut this back because we've got we have a budget deficit. I'll tell you where you can cut it back. You can cut it back right here. But they're not touching that. They're expanding that. How about this? Medicaid. They're defunding Medicaid. It's another entitlement program. There are people in the United States who are poor and they need help. And the government is supposed to be helping them. Well, you want socialism. Did I say that? You want to take care of Americans' safety and security and then they brand you as a socialist? No. I'm a constitutionalist. Hello. How about this one? Healthcare. Took decades for them to come up with a healthcare program while Americans went bankrupt, suffered, and especially the aged, they died without insurance. Shame on the Republicans. I was a Republican for 20 years. Shame on the Republicans for never doing anything about that. Now, when the Democrats did, they brought in the big government and just made it worse. Welcome to government. Welcome to both parties. But now they're working out a health care program. The initial one was, well, okay, we'll get rid of Obamacare. We'll come up with another health care program, but we're not going to cover any pre-existing conditions, or we're going to make it really expensive. You could probably nudge somebody next to you and you got a pre-existing condition, most of our friends have pre-existing conditions. That's probably over half the population have pre-existing conditions. I mean, come on, please. Anybody over 50 probably has a pre-existing condition, okay? Infrastructure is crumbling. Unemployment is twice what the government reports it is. Americans are suffering, and there's actually poverty in the United States. How can this be when we're spending this amount of money on stuff that we don't even know about and we're not even voting for? I mean, that's an outrage. People are starting to not just get educated on that, but they're starting to get upset, and that's where things start to change. When people get upset enough to take action, now we're getting somewhere.